A single gunshot pierced the dawn quiet of Silver Creek as Frances Dawson steadied her trembling hand. The smoking revolver still pointed at the rattlesnake that had nearly struck her. The year was 1875, and the Wyoming Territory was as unforgiving as it was beautiful, especially to a woman traveling alone. She had come west with nothing but determination, and the deed to a small plot of land she'd inherited from her uncle, a man she'd never met but whose death had offered her an escape from a life of servitude in Boston. Frances tucked the revolver back into the folds of her skirt and wiped the sweat from her brow. At 23, she wasn't naive about the challenges that awaited her, but the vastness of the frontier still took her breath away. Her chestnut hair, usually pinned neatly beneath her bonnet, had come loose during her encounter with the snake, and she hastily tucked the wayward strands back into place. "Fine shot, madam," came a deep voice from behind her. Frances whirled around, her hand instinctively moving back toward her hidden weapon. A man sat atop a dappled gray stallion, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the rising sun. He tipped his worn Stetson, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, but with eyes as blue as the Wyoming sky. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, dismounting with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Name's Noah Reed. Most folks around these parts just call me Reed." "Frances Dawson," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd announce yourself before sneaking up on a lady." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, revealing a dimple that softened his otherwise rugged appearance. "Wasn't sneaking, Miss Dawson, just admiring your aim." He nudged the dead rattlesnake with the toe of his boot. Not many city folk can handle themselves so well. Frances bristled at his assumption. "And how do you know I'm from the city?" "Your boots," he replied simply. "Too fine for these parts." "And that dress," he gestured to her travel-worn but still clearly expensive attire, "doesn't exactly blend in with the sagebrush." She lifted her chin defiantly. "Well, Mr. Reed, I may be from Boston, but I'm not some helpless damsel who can't learn to adapt." "Never said you were," he countered, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "In fact, that shot suggests quite the opposite." He glanced at the wagon behind her, noting the broken wheel. "Looks like you could use some help, though." Frances hesitated. She'd been taught to be wary of strangers, especially men in remote locations. But she'd also been stuck for nearly a day, her supplies dwindling, and the nearest town was still miles away according to her map. "I can fix that wheel for you," Noah offered, sensing her reluctance. "No strings attached, just one neighbor helping another." "We're not neighbors," Frances pointed out. "Not yet," he replied cryptically. "But Silver Creek's a small place. Everyone's a neighbor of sorts." Against her better judgment, Frances nodded her acceptance. "I'd be grateful for the help, Mr. Reed." "Just Reed is fine," he said, already rolling up his sleeves to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. "And you might want to step back, Miss Dawson. This could get a bit messy." As Noah worked on the wheel, Frances observed him surreptitiously. He moved with a quiet confidence, his hands strong yet careful. He wasn't what she'd expected from the cowboys she'd read about in dime novels. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rough exterior. "What brings you to Silver Creek?" Noah asked, breaking the silence. "Not exactly a common destination for Eastern ladies traveling alone." Frances debated how much to share. "I inherited some land from my uncle," she said finally. "I came to claim it and start over." Noah glanced up at her, a knowing look in his eyes, running from something or toward something. "Both, perhaps," Frances admitted, surprised by her own candor. He nodded, returning his attention to the wheel. "Most of us out here are. That's the beauty of the West. It gives folks a chance to reinvent themselves." "And what were you running from, Mr. Reed?" Frances asked boldly. He chuckled. "Curious, aren't you?" When she didn't respond, he sighed. "War, ghosts, the usual." Frances understood immediately. "You fought in the Civil War. 10th Cavalry," he confirmed. "Came west afterward like many others, found peace in the open spaces." He gave the wheel a final adjustment. "There, that should hold until you reach town." Frances reached for her purse. "Please let me pay you for your trouble." Noah held up a hand. "No need. Consider it a welcome gift." He wiped his hands on a kerchief and studied her for a moment. Your land would it happen to be the old Dawson place by Thunder Creek? Francis nodded, surprised. You knew my uncle? Everyone knew Isaac Dawson, kept to himself mostly but was fair in his dealings. Noah's expression grew serious. Miss Dawson, that land. It's good land, but it's been abandoned for months now. The cabin might not be in the best shape. Frances felt a flicker of dismay but squared her shoulders. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Reed. Never suggested you were, he said with that half smile again, but winter's coming. Might be wise to have someone look at it before you settle in. Are you offering? Francis asked, raising an eyebrow. Noah mounted his horse with fluid ease. Just being neighborly. The Dawson place borders my ranch to the east. He tipped his hat. Safe travels, Miss Dawson. I suspect we'll be seeing each other again soon. With that, he rode off, leaving Frances to wonder about the enigmatic cowboy and what awaited her at her uncle's homestead. The town of Silver Creek emerged from the landscape like a mirage, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the banks of the creek that gave the settlement its name. Frances guided her wagon down the main street, acutely aware of the curious stares from the townspeople. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough. A well-dressed Eastern woman was a downright curiosity. She pulled up in front of the general store, its weathered sign proclaiming Harrigan's Mercantile in faded letters. Before she could climb down, a portly man with a magnificent mustache emerged from the store, wiping his hands on his apron. "Can I help you, miss?" he called out, his voice friendly but cautious. "I hope so," Frances replied, descending from the wagon with as much dignity as her stiff limbs would allow. "I'm Frances Dawson, Isaac Dawson's niece from Boston. I've come to claim my uncle's property." The man's eyebrows shot up. "Isaac's niece, you say? Well, I'll be." He extended his hand. "Thomas Harrigan at your service. Your uncle was a good customer, God rest his soul." Francis shook his hand, grateful for the warm reception. "Thank you, Mr. Harrigan. I was hoping you might direct me to my uncle's land. I have the deed, but the map I was given is vague at best." Of course, but first you must be exhausted. Come in, have some tea. My wife will be thrilled to meet you." The interior of the store was a treasure trove of goods, from practical necessities to small luxuries that seemed out of place in the frontier town. Mrs. Harrigan, a plump woman with kind eyes, fussed over Frances, insisting she sit while tea was prepared. "We don't get many new faces in Silver Creek," Mrs. Harrigan explained, pouring the steaming beverage. "Especially not young ladies on their own. You must be very brave." "Or very foolish," Frances said with a wry smile. "Nonsense," Mrs. Harrigan replied firmly. "This is a land of opportunity for those with the courage to seize it. Your uncle understood that." As they sipped their tea, Mr. Harrigan filled Frances in on the details of her inheritance. Isaac's place is about 5 miles east of town along Thunder Creek. Good water, fertile soil. He was starting to make something of it before his heart gave out. "I ran into a Mr. Reed on my way here," Frances mentioned casually. "He said his ranch borders my uncle's land." The Harrigans exchanged knowing glances. "Noah Reed," Mr. Harrigan confirmed, "one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. Started with almost nothing after the war and built the Circle R into something impressive. He's a good man," Mrs. Harrigan added. "Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but always ready to help a neighbor in need." "He's also unmarried," Mr. Harrigan said with a meaningful look at his wife, who swatted at him good-naturedly. "Thomas, don't embarrass the poor girl. She's only just arrived." Frances felt her cheeks warm. "I assure you, I didn't come west to find a husband. I came to build a life for myself." "Of course you did, dear," Mrs. Harrigan soothed, "but it doesn't hurt to know who's who in your new community." After finishing her tea, Frances purchased supplies for her journey to the homestead. Mr. Harrigan insisted on drawing her a detailed map and offered to have his son, a sturdy young man named Daniel, escort her. "That's very kind, but I'll manage," Frances assured him. "I've imposed enough already." "It's no imposition," Mr. Harrigan insisted. "These roads can be treacherous, especially if you don't know the way." Frances reluctantly agreed, and soon she was back on the road with Daniel Harrigan riding alongside her wagon. The young man was chatty, filling the journey with local gossip and history. "Your uncle was respected," Daniel told her. Kept to himself but fair in his dealings. Had some troubles with cattle rustlers last year, though. Francis frowned. Rustlers? Was anything resolved? Daniel shook his head. Not officially. But the rustling stopped after Reed and some of the other ranchers formed a patrol. Some say they took matters into their own hands, if you catch my meaning. Francis mulled this over as they traveled. The West was indeed different from Boston, where law and order were established institutions. Here, justice seemed to be a more fluid concept. As they crested a hill, Daniel pointed ahead. There it is, Dawson Homestead. Francis's heart sank at the sight. The cabin was small, its roof partially collapsed on one side. The barn looked somewhat sturdier, but the corral fence was broken in several places. The land around it, however, was beautiful rolling meadows bordered by stands of pine, with the silver ribbon of Thunder Creek winding through it. It needs work, Daniel admitted, seeing her expression. But the bones are good. Isaac was starting to make improvements before he passed. Francis nodded, squaring her shoulders. Thank you for showing me the way, Daniel. I can manage from here. The young man looked doubtful. Are you sure? I could stay, help you get settled. I'm sure, Francis said firmly. Please thank your parents for their kindness. After Daniel reluctantly departed, Francis stood alone in front of her new home, the enormity of her decision finally hitting her. She was miles from civilization, with winter approaching, in a cabin that barely deserved the name. For a moment, doubts assailed her. Perhaps she had been foolish, leaving the security of Boston for this wild uncertainty. But then she remembered what she'd left behind: the stifling expectations, the limited opportunities, the unwanted advances of her employer's son. No, she couldn't go back. With determination, Francis entered the cabin. The interior was dusty but not as dire as the exterior suggested. Basic furniture remained: a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a bed frame with a straw mattress, and a stone fireplace. She could make this work. She was sweeping out the main room when a shadow darkened the doorway. Francis whirled around, broom clutched like a weapon, only to find Noah Reed leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed over his broad chest. Settling in, he asked, amusement dancing in his eyes. Mr. Reed, Francis acknowledged, lowering the broom. Do you always appear unannounced at ladies' homes? Only when the lady in question is trying to survive winter in a half-collapsed cabin, he replied, stepping inside and casting a critical eye around the space. This roof won't last the first snow. Francis bristled. I'm aware of the challenges. I'll manage. Noah shook his head. Stubbornness won't keep you warm when the blizzards come, Miss Dawson, and they will come. What do you suggest then? Francis asked, exasperation creeping into her voice. That I abandon my inheritance and scurry back east? No, he said simply. I suggest you accept help when it's offered. I have men who can repair this roof before the week is out. No strings attached. Francis studied him suspiciously. Why would you do that? Noah's expression softened. Because Isaac was a good neighbor. And because no one should face their first Wyoming winter in a leaky cabin. He paused. Consider it a welcome gift if that makes it easier to accept. Francis wavered, her pride battling with practicality. I can't pay much, she admitted finally. I'm not asking for payment, Noah replied. Just some of your famous Boston hospitality when my men get hungry. Deal, despite herself, Francis smiled. Deal, Mr. Reed. Good. He turned to leave, then paused. And Francis, it's just Reed. Mr. Reed was my father, and he was a much more formal man than I'll ever be. As he strode away, Francis found herself watching him longer than was proper. There was something about Noah Reed that intrigued her, a complexity beneath his straightforward manner, but she pushed those thoughts aside. She had a home to restore and a new life to build. Romance was the furthest thing from her mind. True to his word, Noah sent 3 men the next day to repair the roof. They worked efficiently under the supervision of a weathered cowhand named Hank, who treated Francis with gruff respect. She, in turn, fed them hearty stews made from her dwindling supplies, stretching the ingredients as best she could. On the 3rd day, as the men were finishing the roof, a wagon arrived carrying Mrs. Harrigan and several other women from town. They brought food, linens, preserved goods, and most precious of all, seeds for spring planting. We thought you could use some essentials. Mrs. Harrigan explained, embracing Francis warmly, and some company that doesn't spit tobacco juice. The women helped Francis clean the cabin thoroughly, offered advice on winter preparations, and shared stories that painted a vivid picture of Silver Creek's community. By the time they left, Francis felt less like an outsider and more like a welcomed newcomer. That evening, as Francis sat on her newly repaired porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold, she heard the now familiar sound of hoofbeats. Noah approached, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze on her forehead. "Evening, Francis," he called, dismounting with easy grace. "Brought you something." Francis stood puzzled. "Another welcome gift," Noah smiled, that dimple appearing briefly. "Call it a necessity. Can't have a homesteader without a horse." He patted the mare's neck. "This is Daisy. She's steady, not too spirited, but not lazy either. Perfect for someone still learning the ropes." Francis approached cautiously, extending her hand to let the horse sniff it. "She's beautiful, but I can't possibly accept." "You can and you will," Noah interrupted firmly. "I'm not giving her to you. She's on loan until you get on your feet. Besides, she was my sister's horse, and she's been getting fat and lazy at my ranch since Abigail moved east last year." Francis stroked Daisy's soft muzzle, already charmed by the gentle creature. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Noah replied, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "That's what neighbors do out here. We look out for each other." As the days passed, Francis fell into a rhythm of work that left her exhausted but satisfied. She learned to chop wood without blistering her hands, to hunt small game for her table, and to ride Daisy with increasing confidence. Noah stopped by every few days, sometimes bringing supplies, other times simply checking that she was managing. Each visit left Francis more confused about her feelings. Noah was undeniably handsome, with his tall frame and sun-kissed skin. But it was his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness that drew her to him. The way he spoke to his horse in soft tones, the careful way he handled a newborn calf he'd brought for her to see, the respect with which he treated her opinions, all of it chipped away at the walls she'd built around her heart. One crisp October morning, Francis was chopping wood when she heard riders approaching. Expecting Noah, she looked up with a smile that quickly faded when she saw three unfamiliar men. Their unshaven faces and hard eyes immediately put her on guard. "Well, well," the leader said, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek. "Isaac Dawson's place has a new occupant, and a pretty one at that." Francis gripped the axe tighter. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The leader dismounted, his spurs jingling ominously. "Name's Jackson. These are my associates, Pike and Wellen. We were business partners with your uncle." Francis doubted that very much. "My uncle's been dead for months. Any business you had with him died too." Jackson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now, that's where you're wrong, miss. Your uncle and I had an arrangement regarding water rights to Thunder Creek. He was going to sell me a section of this land." "That's interesting," Francis replied coolly, "since I have his will and deed, and there's no mention of any sale or arrangement." Jackson's expression hardened. "Maybe he didn't get around to writing it down, but we shook on it, and out here a handshake is as good as a contract." "Not to me," Francis stated firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Jackson took a menacing step forward. "I don't think you understand the situation, miss. This territory can be dangerous for a woman alone. Accidents happen. Cabins burn. It would be a shame if the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked interrupted him." Noah stood at the edge of the clearing, his Winchester aimed steadily at Jackson's chest. "Problem, Francis?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual. Relief flooded through her. "These gentlemen were just leaving." Jackson's eyes narrowed as he studied Noah. "Reed, should have known you'd be sniffing around new property. This ain't your concern." "Francis is my neighbor," Noah replied evenly. "That makes it my concern." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft nickering of horses. Finally, Jackson shrugged, affecting nonchalance. "We were just introducing ourselves, being neighborly." "Neighborliness noted," Noah said coldly. "Now ride out." Jackson mounted his horse, fixing Francis with a hard stare. "Think about my offer, miss. I'll be back to discuss it proper like." After they departed, Francis released a shaky breath. "Thank you. I wasn't sure how that would have ended. Noah's expression was grim as he lowered his rifle. Those men are trouble. Jackson's been trying to buy up water rights all over the territory. Those who refuse tend to have misfortunes. Francis frowned. You think they had something to do with the cattle rustling Daniel Harrigan mentioned? I know they did, Noah confirmed. But proving it is another matter. The territorial marshal has his hands full, and Jackson's careful to keep his distance from the dirty work. Francis returned to her woodpile, splitting a log with more force than necessary. I won't be intimidated off my land. Noah watched her, a mixture of admiration and concern in his eyes. I don't doubt your courage, Francis, but these men are dangerous. Until this is resolved, you shouldn't stay here alone. What do you suggest? Francis asked, pausing in her work. I have nowhere else to go. Noah considered for a moment. I have a spare room at my ranch house. My housekeeper, Mrs. Caldwell, lives there too, so your reputation would be safe. Francis bristled. I'm not abandoning my home because of threats. Not abandoning, Noah corrected. Strategic retreat. Just until we can ensure Jackson and his men won't cause trouble. Francis shook her head stubbornly. This is my land, my home. If I leave now, even temporarily, I send the message that intimidation works. Noah ran a hand through his hair in frustration. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. I prefer determined, Francis retorted, a smile tugging at her lips despite the situation. Noah couldn't help but smile back. Fine, if you won't come to my ranch, then I'll have to bring the ranch to you. I'll send 2 of my men to stay in your barn. They can keep watch at night. Francis wanted to refuse, to insist she could handle things alone, but practicality won out. Very well, but only until this situation is resolved. Agreed, Noah said, his relief evident. And Francis. Keep that rifle of yours loaded and close at hand. That night, with Noah's men keeping watch from the barn, Francis lay in her bed, thoughts swirling. She was touched by Noah's protectiveness, even as her independent nature rebelled against needing protection. More confusing were the feelings his presence stirred in her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in her hearth. In Boston, she'd sworn off romantic entanglements after a painful betrayal by her former fiancé, who'd abandoned her when her family lost their fortune. She'd come west to build a life of independence, not to fall for the first handsome cowboy who showed her kindness. And yet, there was something about Noah Reed that defied her carefully constructed defenses. He respected her autonomy even as he offered his help. He seemed to truly see her in a way no one ever had before. With these thoughts tangling in her mind, Francis finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, unaware that the coming days would test not only her resolve to keep her land, but also her determination to guard her heart. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost silvering the grass and the distant mountains sharp against the sky. Francis rose early, stoking the fire and preparing coffee for Noah's men. They accepted it gratefully, reporting a quiet night with no sign of Jackson or his companions. As she fed her chickens a gift from Mrs. Harrigan, Francis spotted a rider approaching. Her heart quickened, thinking it might be Noah, but instead it was a young boy of perhaps 12 riding a pinto pony. Miss Dawson, he called, reining in his mount. Mr. Reed sent me with a message. What is it? Francis asked, brushing feed from her hands. He says to tell you there's a town meeting tonight at the Silver Creek Schoolhouse about the water rights issue. He says it's important you attend. The boy fidgeted in his saddle. And he also said to tell you he's sorry he couldn't come himself. Had to ride to Fort Laramie on business. Francis thanked the boy and sent him on his way with a cookie from her meager stores. A town meeting suggested that her problem with Jackson wasn't isolated, others must be facing similar pressures. That afternoon, she hitched Daisy to her wagon and made the journey into Silver Creek, accompanied by one of Noah's men, a taciturn cowboy named Charlie. The schoolhouse was already crowded when they arrived, filled with ranchers, farmers, and townspeople. Mr. Harrigan waved Francis over to a seat near the front, where Noah was engaged in intense conversation with a distinguished-looking gentleman in a marshal's badge. Francis, Noah greeted her, his face lighting up in a way that made her stomach flutter. Glad you could make it. This is Marshal Bennett from Cheyenne. The marshal tipped his hat. Miss Dawson, I've heard about your situation with Jackson. You're not the only one he's been pressuring. That's why we called this meeting, Noah explained. Jackson's been systematically trying to control water access throughout the territory. Some folks have sold to him out of fear. Others have had mysterious accidents that forced them to sell. The meeting was called to order by the town mayor, a former judge named Williams. One by one, local landowners stood to share their experiences with Jackson and his men: threats, sabotage, intimidation. The pattern was clear. Jackson was building a water empire, one property at a time. The problem, Marshall Bennett explained, is that I need evidence. Threats are hard to prove without witnesses willing to testify, and most folks are too scared. Or too dead, muttered an old rancher in the back, causing a ripple of grim laughter. Frances listened, growing increasingly troubled. When the mayor asked if anyone else wished to speak, she rose to her feet. I may be new to Silver Creek, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, but I recognize a bully when I see one. In Boston, men like Jackson operate behind a veneer of respectability, but their methods are the same: fear and force. I refuse to be driven from my land by such tactics. A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. Emboldened, Frances continued, Marshall Bennett needs evidence. I propose we give it to him. If Jackson approaches any of us again, we document it, find witnesses, build a case that will stand in court. And in the meantime, called someone from the crowd, we just hope our barns don't mysteriously catch fire. No, Noah interjected, standing beside Frances. We watch out for each other. Establish patrols, share information. Jackson and his men can't be everywhere at once. The meeting ended with a plan. A rotation of armed patrols, a system for sending warnings, and agreement to document any suspicious activities. As people filtered out, Frances felt a surge of belonging. These people, still mostly strangers, were willing to stand together against a common threat. Noah walked her to her wagon. That was quite a speech, he said, admiration evident in his voice. You've got a way of rallying people. Frances smiled, suddenly shy under his appreciative gaze. I just spoke the truth. No one should be bullied off their land. No, they shouldn't, he agreed softly. His hand brushed hers as he helped her into the wagon, sending a jolt of awareness through her. Frances, I was wondering if you might join me for supper at my ranch tomorrow. I'd like to show you the place, since we're neighbors and all. Frances hesitated only briefly. I'd like that, Noah. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. I'll send Charlie to escort you over around noon. The ranch is only about an hour's ride from your place. As Frances drove home under a canopy of stars, she found herself looking forward to the next day with an anticipation that had nothing to do with neighborly relations and everything to do with the way Noah Reed's blue eyes crinkled when he smiled. The Circle R Ranch exceeded Frances's expectations. The main house was a substantial two-story structure built of sturdy logs, with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Well-maintained outbuildings surrounded it, a barn larger than Frances's entire homestead, bunkhouses for the ranch hands, a smokehouse, and a blacksmith's forge. Noah greeted her at the main gate, looking different in clean clothes and freshly shaved. His smile was warm as he helped her down from her wagon. Welcome to Circle R, he said, pride evident in his voice. It's not much compared to what you're probably used to back east, but it's magnificent, Frances interrupted sincerely. You've built something remarkable here. Noah's expression softened. Thank you. It wasn't easy, especially at first. Came out here with nothing but my army pay and a dream of open spaces where I could breathe again after the war. He gave her a tour of the property, introducing her to his foreman, a former Buffalo soldier named Isaiah who'd served with Noah in the war, and to Mrs. Caldwell, the no-nonsense housekeeper who ruled the main house with an iron fist and a heart of gold. She adopted me when I first arrived, Noah explained as they walked toward the corrals. Said I was too skinny and too serious, appointed herself my keeper. You were a skeleton with sad eyes, Mrs. Caldwell corrected, overhearing as she hung laundry. Someone had to fatten you up and teach you to smile again. Frances liked the older woman immediately, recognizing in her the same practical kindness she'd experienced from Mrs. Harrigan and the other women of Silver Creek. The day passed pleasantly as Noah showed her his prize cattle, the spring-fed pond where he was experimenting with raising trout, and the apple orchard he'd started 3 years prior. Everywhere, Frances saw evidence of careful planning and hard work, a man building not just for today, but for generations to come. As the sun began its descent, they returned to the house for supper. Mrs. Caldwell had outdone herself, preparing a feast that made Frances realize how sparse her own meals had been lately. "This is wonderful," she said, savoring a bite of tender roast beef. "I haven't eaten this well since leaving Boston." Noah frowned slightly. "Are you short on supplies at your place?" Frances shrugged. "I'm managing. Game has been plentiful and I still have provisions from town." "But winter's coming," Noah pointed out. "Have you put up enough preserves, smoked enough meat?" "I'm learning as I go," Frances admitted. "Mrs. Harrigan has been teaching me to can vegetables, and I've been smoking rabbit and squirrel, but it's not enough for a Wyoming winter," Noah finished for her. His expression grew thoughtful. "I'm butchering a steer tomorrow. I'll bring you a quarter." Frances started to protest, but Noah held up a hand. "It's not charity, Frances. It's an investment in a neighbor. Next spring, when your garden's producing, you can share some of those fancy Eastern vegetables Mrs. Harrigan says you're planning to grow." Put that way, Frances could accept. "Thank you. I'd be glad to share my harvest." After supper, they sat on the porch, watching twilight paint the landscape in purples and golds. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the soft hooting of an owl. "May I ask you something personal?" Frances ventured finally. Noah nodded, his profile strong against the fading light. "Ask away." "Why did you never marry a successful man like you with all this?" She gestured at the sprawling ranch. Noah was quiet for so long that Frances feared she'd overstepped. When he spoke, his voice was soft with remembered pain. "I was engaged once before the war. Her name was Sarah. We grew up together in Pennsylvania, had our lives all planned out." He sighed. "Then the war came. I joined up, believing it would be over quickly. It wasn't." Frances waited, sensing there was more to the story. "I was wounded at Gettysburg," Noah continued. "Not badly, but enough to send me home for a few months. Found out Sarah had married my cousin while I was gone. Said she couldn't bear the waiting, the uncertainty." "I'm sorry," Frances said softly. Noah shrugged. "It was a long time ago, and truthfully, coming west was the best thing that ever happened to me. Found my purpose here." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the first emerging stars. "What about you? No broken hearts left behind in Boston?" Frances gave a humorless laugh. "One, I was engaged to the son of my father's business partner. When father's shipping company failed and he died shortly after, my fiancé discovered he wasn't in love with a penniless orphan after all." Noah's expression darkened. "Sounds like you're better off without him." "I am," Frances agreed. "Though at the time it felt like the end of the world. I had to take a position as a companion to an elderly lady just to survive. When I received news of Uncle Isaac's bequest, it seemed like Providence offering a fresh start." "And now," Noah asked, "do you regret coming west?" Frances considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "Despite the challenges, the hard work, Jackson's threats, the approaching winter, I don't regret it. For the first time in my life, I'm building something that's truly mine." "There's freedom in that." Noah's smile was gentle. "I understand that feeling well." As night fell in earnest, Noah escorted Frances back to her wagon, Charlie ready to accompany her home. At the gate, Noah took her hand, his touch sending warmth spiraling through her despite the evening chill. "I enjoyed today," he said simply. "You're welcome at Circle R anytime, Frances." "Thank you for everything," she replied, reluctant to end the evening. For a moment, it seemed Noah might say more, might even lean in to kiss her, but instead he stepped back, releasing her hand. Safe journey home. As her wagon rattled down the road, Frances found herself touching the spot where Noah's hand had held hers, wondering at the emotions this quiet cowboy stirred in her, and fearing that her heart, which she'd sworn to keep safely guarded, was already slipping beyond her control. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm of hard work and increasing vigilance. True to the plan formed at the town meeting, ranchers and farmers established regular patrols, and information about Jackson's movements was shared quickly throughout the community. Noah was true to his word about the beef, arriving the day after their dinner with a quarter of a steer, which he helped Francis butcher and smoke. He also brought 2 more of his men to reinforce the patrol around her property, a precaution that proved wise when tracks were discovered suggesting someone had been watching the cabin at night. As November deepened toward December, the first serious snow fell, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. Frances awoke to find her world transformed, the familiar contours of her land softened under a glistening mantle. She stepped onto her porch, breath fogging in the crisp air, and was struck by the absolute silence, a quiet so profound it seemed almost holy. The spell was broken by the approach of riders. Noah and Isaiah emerged from the tree line, their horses leaving deep tracks in the virgin snow. "Thought we'd check on you," Noah called, dismounting. "First snow can be disorienting if you're not used to it." Frances smiled, genuine pleasure at seeing him warming her more effectively than her woolen shawl. "It's beautiful." "I've seen snow in Boston, of course, but nothing like this so vast and untouched." Noah grinned, boyish excitement lighting his features. "Wait until you see what it's like to ride through it. Get Daisy saddled. I want to show you something." Intrigued, Frances quickly changed into her warmest clothes and prepared Daisy, who seemed equally excited by the snow, prancing and blowing clouds of steam from her nostrils. Isaiah begged off, saying he needed to check on the lined shacks where some of the ranch hands were staying, so Frances and Noah set off alone. He led her through pine forests where branches hung heavy with snow, across meadows that sparkled like fields of diamonds, and finally to a ridge overlooking a valley where a herd of elk grazed, their breath visible in the clear air. "It's breathtaking," Frances whispered, afraid to break the spell of the moment. Noah nodded, his eyes on her face rather than the view. "This is why I stay despite the hardships, moments like this." They dismounted, letting the horses rest while they stood at the edge of the ridge. Noah seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous, fidgeting with something in his pocket. "Frances," he began finally, "I've been wanting to ask you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes, the winter's going to be harsh. Your cabin is better now, but still not ideal for someone's first Wyoming winter." "I was wondering," he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "That is, Mrs. Caldwell was wondering if you might consider spending the worst of the winter at Circle R. We have plenty of room, and she worries about you out here alone." Frances felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. What had she expected? A declaration of love after just a few months of acquaintance. "That's very kind of Mrs. Caldwell," she said carefully, "but I need to prove I can manage on my own." Noah's expression was unreadable. "I understand pride, Frances. I have plenty of it myself. But there's no shame in accepting help when nature itself is the adversary." Before she could respond, a shot rang out, the report echoing across the valley. The elk scattered, and Noah instinctively pulled Frances down behind a fallen log. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing his revolver and creeping toward the tree line. Frances's heart pounded as she watched him disappear among the pines. Minutes stretched like hours before he returned, his expression grim. "Hunters?" Frances asked hopefully. Noah shook his head. "No tracks except ours. Whoever fired that shot didn't want to be found." His jaw tightened. "They wanted to send a message." "Jackson," Frances breathed. "Most likely." Noah helped her to her feet. "We should get back. It's not safe to be out in the open." They rode swiftly, alert for any sign of pursuit, but reached Frances's cabin without incident. Noah insisted on checking the property thoroughly before allowing Frances inside. "Everything seems secure," he reported, rejoining her on the porch. "But I don't like this, Frances." "Jackson's getting bolder. What can we do?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Noah ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of frustration. "I'm riding to Cheyenne tomorrow to speak with Marshal Bennett. This has gone on long enough. Will that help?" He said he needed evidence. "I'm hoping the pattern of intimidation across multiple properties will be enough to at least get an investigation started." Noah's expression softened as he looked at her. "In the meantime, please consider my offer. You'd be safer at Circle R." Frances hesitated. The shot had frightened her more than she wanted to admit, but the thought of abandoning her home, even temporarily, felt like surrender. "Let me think about it." Noah nodded, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. "Fair enough, I'll be back in 3 days, weather permitting." He mounted his horse, then paused. "Francis, promise me you'll keep your rifle close." "I promise," she assured him, touched by his concern. After he rode away, Francis entered her cabin, suddenly aware of how isolated it was. The silence that had seemed magical earlier now felt oppressive, filled with unseen threats. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, she questioned whether she had the courage to see this adventure through. That night, she slept fitfully, waking at every creak and groan of the cabin settling in the cold. Dawn brought fresh snow and a renewed determination. She would not be driven from her land by fear. The day passed uneventfully as Frances tended to her chores, grateful for the 2 ranch hands Noah had left to watch over her property. But as dusk approached, one of the men, a young cowboy named Tom, rode up to the cabin with alarming news. "Miss Dawson, smoke signals from the next ridge." "It's the warning we arranged at the town meeting, trouble coming." Frances's mouth went dry. "Jackson, can't say for sure, but 3 riders were spotted heading this way from the direction of Jackson's claim." Tom's young face was serious beneath his hat. "Me and Pete think you should come with us to Circle R. Mr. Reed's orders were to get you to safety if there was any sign of trouble." Frances glanced at her cabin, small but sturdy, the first home that had truly been hers. The thought of leaving it undefended grated against every independent fiber of her being. "No," she said firmly, "I'm staying. This is my land and I won't be chased off it." Tom looked distressed. "But Mr. Reed said—" "Mr. Reed isn't here," Frances interrupted. "And I'm not abandoning my home. If Jackson wants to intimidate me, he'll have to do it to my face." The young cowboy clearly struggled with this defiance of his boss's orders, but finally nodded. "Yes, madam, but we'll stay close. First sign of real trouble, you fire a shot in the air, and we'll come running." As darkness fell, Frances prepared for a siege. She filled buckets with water in case of fire, loaded her rifle and revolver, and positioned herself near a window with a clear view of the approach to the cabin. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness, each shadow outside potentially harboring danger. It was nearly midnight when she heard the soft nicker of a horse being quieted, followed by the crunch of boots on snow. Frances gripped her rifle tighter, heart pounding so loudly she feared it might give away her position. A shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the clearing, then another. They moved with the caution of men who knew they were unwelcome, pausing frequently to listen. Frances held her breath as they approached the barn first, disappearing inside. Moments later, the acrid smell of smoke reached her nostrils. Flames flickered inside the barn, growing rapidly as they consumed the dry hay stored there. Frances's blood ran cold. They meant to burn her out. Without hesitation, she fired her rifle into the air, the signal for Tom and Pete. Then, driven by fury more than fear, she threw open the cabin door and fired a second shot toward the barn, not aiming to hit anyone but to announce her presence. "Get off my land." She shouted, her voice carrying in the still night air. The shadowy figures bolted from the barn, clearly surprised to find resistance. One of them raised a rifle, and Frances ducked back inside as a bullet splintered the doorframe where her head had been moments before. Heart racing, she reloaded and moved to a window, catching glimpses of movement as the intruders sought cover. In the distance, she heard the thunder of approaching hooves, Tom and Pete responding to her signal. One of the shadowy figures shouted to the others, and they broke cover, racing for their horses tethered at the edge of the clearing. Frances fired again, this time deliberately wide, but the sound seemed to spur the intruders to greater speed. By the time Tom and Pete galloped into the clearing, the arsonists were disappearing into the tree line. The ranch hands fired a few shots after them, but the darkness made accurate aim impossible. "The barn," Frances cried, already running toward the burning structure. Together, they formed a bucket brigade from the well to the barn, working desperately to control the flames. The fire had spread quickly, but the recent snow had dampened the timbers enough to slow its progress. After an exhausting hour, they managed to extinguish the worst of it, though half the barn was a charred ruin. "Did you recognize any of them?" Frances asked, collapsing onto a stump, her face streaked with soot and sweat despite the cold. Tom shook his head. "Too dark." But they rode out toward Jackson's claim, just as we suspected. Pete, older and more experienced, examined the tracks left behind. 3 men, like the smoke signal warned. One horse had a distinctive shoe split on the right front. "I've seen that mark before, near Jackson's place." Frances nodded grimly. "We have our evidence now. When Mr. Reed returns, we'll take this to Marshal Bennett." The remainder of the night passed in watchful tension, but the arsonists did not return. At dawn, Frances surveyed the damage in the harsh light of day. Half her barn was destroyed, along with the hay she'd stored for winter and some of her tools. It could have been worse. The cabin was untouched, and no one had been hurt, but the violation of her property filled her with equal parts rage and fear. Tom rode to alert the neighbors, while Pete stayed with Frances. By mid-morning, several local ranchers had arrived to help clear the debris and salvage what could be saved from the barn. Their solidarity touched Frances deeply. These people, still virtually strangers, rallying to her aid without hesitation. Mr. Harrigan arrived with lumber from his store, refusing payment. "This is how we survive out here," he told Frances firmly. "Today it's your barn. Tomorrow it might be my store or someone else's home. We stand together." By sunset, the damaged section of the barn had been cleared away and temporary repairs made to the surviving structure. Frances was overwhelmed by the community's response, a stark contrast to the indifference she'd often encountered in Boston after her father's death. As the neighbors departed, promising to return the next day to continue repairs, Mrs. Harrigan pulled Frances aside. "You should stay with us in town tonight, dear. It's not safe here." Frances shook her head. "Thank you, but no. If I leave now, Jackson wins. I need to show everyone that I won't be intimidated." Mrs. Harrigan didn't look convinced but didn't argue further. "At least keep the boys with you," she said, nodding toward Tom and Pete. "Thomas and I would rest easier knowing you weren't alone." Frances agreed to this compromise. After the Harrigans left, she prepared a simple supper for herself and the 2 cowboys, who gratefully accepted the hot meal before returning to their vigilant patrol of the property. Alone in her cabin, Frances finally allowed herself to feel the full impact of the night's events. She trembled, delayed shock setting in as she realized how close she'd come to losing everything, perhaps even her life. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. She would not give in to fear or despair, not when so many had shown their faith in her today. She was still awake, unable to settle, when hoofbeats approached shortly before midnight. Grabbing her rifle, she moved to the window, relief washing over her when she recognized Noah's distinctive silhouette astride his gray stallion. He dismounted in a fluid motion that spoke of urgency, striding toward the cabin with purpose in every step. Frances opened the door before he could knock, the sight of him travel-worn and grim-faced inexplicably calming her frayed nerves. "Tom found me on the road," Noah explained without preamble, his eyes quickly scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No," Frances assured him, "just shaken." Noah stepped inside, removing his hat, his face etched with concern and something deeper, more intense. "When I heard." "Frances, I've never ridden so hard in my life." The raw emotion in his voice pierced through Frances's carefully maintained composure. To her mortification, tears spilled down her cheeks, the events of the past 24 hours finally overwhelming her control. In 2 strides, Noah crossed the room and gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were something precious and fragile. Frances buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him leather and pine, and something uniquely Noah as she allowed herself this moment of vulnerability. "I was so afraid," she admitted, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Not just for myself, but that I'd fail, that I'd lose everything I've worked for." Noah's arms tightened around her. "You haven't failed. You stood your ground against men who would have sent most people running." "That's not failure, Frances. That's courage." She pulled back slightly to look up at him, suddenly aware of their proximity, of the warmth of his body against hers. Noah's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a heartbeat, Frances thought he might kiss her. Her breath caught at the possibility. Instead, Noah gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the tenderness of the gesture almost more intimate than a kiss would have been. "You're not alone in this fight," he said softly. "I hope you know that," Francis nodded, reluctantly stepping back from his embrace. "The neighbors showed me that today. I've never experienced such community." Noah smiled slightly. "That's the West for you. Harsh land breeds dependence on one another." He moved to the stove where coffee still simmered. "May I, of course?" Francis watched as he poured himself a cup, his movements efficient despite obvious fatigue. "Did you reach Marshall Bennett?" Noah nodded, his expression darkening. "He's on his way, should arrive tomorrow or the next day." This attack, combined with the pattern we've documented, should be enough to move against Jackson. "Will it be enough to stop him permanently?" Francis asked, doubt creeping into her voice. Noah set down his cup, his gaze direct. "I don't know," he admitted. "Men like Jackson don't give up easily." "But this territory is changing, Francis. Law is taking root. The days of settling disputes with violence are waning." Francis considered this. "What if it's not enough? What if he comes back?" "Then we'll face that together," Noah said simply. As if it were the most natural thing in the world, this "we" that had formed between them almost without conscious thought. The word hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Francis found herself wondering what exactly Noah meant by together as neighbors, as friends. Or as something more. Before she could find the courage to ask, Noah yawned, the exhaustion of his hard ride clearly catching up with him. "You should rest," Francis said. "You can take my bed." "I'll keep watch." Noah shook his head firmly. "I'll sleep in the chair, you take the bed." When she started to protest, he held up a hand. "I've slept in worse places during the war, Francis. The chair will be fine." Too tired to argue, Francis retreated to her small bedroom, leaving the door ajar. She listened as Noah settled into the rocking chair near the stove, the rhythmic creaking oddly comforting as she drifted towards sleep. Her last conscious thought was a realization that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. Somewhere along the way, without her noticing, Noah Reed had become essential to her happiness. The independent life she'd come west to build now seemed incomplete without him in it. Marshall Bennett arrived the following afternoon, a tall man with a weathered face and eyes that missed nothing. He examined the burned barn, interviewed Francis and the witnesses, and documented the distinctive horseshoe print Pete had identified. "It's circumstantial," he admitted as they gathered in Francis's cabin. "But combined with the pattern of similar incidents across the territory, it's enough for me to bring Jackson in for questioning." "Will that be enough?" Francis asked, echoing her question to Noah from the previous night. The marshal's expression was carefully neutral. "Depends on what we find when we search his property. Men like Jackson usually keep records they can't help themselves. If we find evidence linking him to other incidents or names of hired guns he's employed." "And if you don't?" Noah pressed. Bennett sighed. "Then I'll still issue a warning, put him under observation. It might be enough to discourage further incidents, at least for a while." It wasn't the definitive solution Francis had hoped for, but it was something. Marshall Bennett departed for Jackson's claim with 2 deputies, promising to return with news. The next few days passed in anxious waiting. The neighbors continued to help rebuild Francis's barn, and Noah divided his time between his ranch and her homestead, never staying away for more than a few hours at a stretch. His presence was a comfort Francis hadn't known she needed until it was there, steady, reliable, asking nothing in return. On the 3rd day after the marshal's departure, a rider approached. Francis and Noah were replacing roof boards on the barn when Tom called out the warning. They descended quickly, Noah positioning himself slightly in front of Francis as the rider came into view. It was Marshall Bennett, looking tired but satisfied. "It's done," he announced without preamble. "We found enough evidence at Jackson's place to arrest him and 2 of his men. Account books detailing payments to known troublemakers, correspondence about water rights he was planning to acquire by any means necessary." Relief flooded through Francis. "So it's over, Jackson's finished," Bennett confirmed. "He'll be transported to Cheyenne for trial, but with the evidence we found, he won't be returning to Silver Creek." Noah's hand found Francis's, squeezing gently. Thank you, Marshal, Bennett nodded, preparing to depart. Just doing my job, the territory's changing. Men like Jackson need to understand that the law applies out here now, same as back east. He tipped his hat to Frances. You showed real grit, Miss Dawson. Wyoming could use more settlers with your spirit. After the marshal rode away, Frances turned to Noah, suddenly shy despite everything they'd been through together. I should thank you two for everything. Noah shook his head, still holding her hand. No thanks needed. I told you before that's what neighbors do. Is that what we are? Frances asked quietly, just neighbors. Something shifted in Noah's eyes, uncertainty giving way to resolve. No, he said simply. Not just neighbors, not for a while now. Heart pounding, Frances waited for him to continue, to define what exactly they were to each other if not merely neighbors. But Noah seemed to be struggling with words, an unusual state for a man normally so direct. Frances, he began finally, I'm not good at this, at expressing feelings. He ran his free hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of frustration. When I heard about the attack, when I thought you might be hurt or worse, I realized something I think I've known for months but was too afraid to acknowledge. What? Frances whispered, hardly daring to breathe. That I love you, Noah said, the words simple yet profound in their honesty. That somewhere between fixing your wagon wheel and fighting off Jackson's men, you became the most important person in my life. He smiled ruefully. Not very romantic, I know. Frances felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. It's perfectly romantic, she assured him, stepping closer. Because I love you too, Noah Reed. I think I have almost from the beginning, though I was too stubborn to admit it. Noah's smile was radiant as he cupped her face in his hands. May I kiss you, Frances Dawson? Please, she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing passion as she responded eagerly. It was everything a first kiss should be, tender, exhilarating, a promise of more to come. When they finally broke apart, Noah rested his forehead against hers. I want to build a life with you, Frances, not just as neighbors, but as partners in everything. Will you consider it? Frances smiled, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. I'm considering it very favorably. Noah laughed, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace that made Frances giggle like a schoolgirl. When he set her down, his expression grew more serious, though his eyes still shone with happiness. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He pulled out a simple gold band with a small diamond. It was my mother's. I had it sized down for you in Cheyenne. Frances stared at the ring, then at Noah, astonishment rendering her momentarily speechless. Noah, are you? Proposing? I am, he confirmed, dropping to one knee in the snow. Frances Dawson, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love, respect, and support you for all the days of my life. Frances looked at the earnest man before her, this cowboy who had come into her life when she least expected it, and changed everything. The independent future she'd envisioned for herself hadn't included a husband, but Noah wasn't offering to diminish her independence, he was offering to share it, to build something together that would be stronger than what either could create alone. Noah, she began, her voice thick with emotion, I came west to find freedom, to prove I could stand on my own. I wasn't looking for love. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Noah's face, but he remained steadfast, waiting for her to finish. But love found me anyway, Frances continued, her smile breaking through like sunshine. And I've discovered that true freedom isn't about standing alone, it's about choosing who to stand beside. Hope dawned in Noah's eyes. Is that a yes? Frances tried to reach for the ring, but to her surprise, her hands were trembling too much to take it. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Noah Reed, I will marry you. Instead of placing the ring in her palm as she expected, Noah gently took her left hand and slipped the ring directly onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the small diamond catching the winter sunlight. Now we're forever, he said softly, rising to his feet. Frances stared at the ring, then at the man who had placed it there. Forever, she agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek, met with universal approval and more than a few knowing smiles from those who had watched their relationship develop. Mrs. Harrigan immediately appointed herself wedding planner, while Mrs. Caldwell fussed over the practical arrangements of combining two households. They were married on Christmas Eve in the Silver Creek Church, decorated with pine boughs and candles for the occasion. Francis wore a gown of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Harrigan had ordered from Denver, and Noah looked uncommonly handsome in a new suit, his usual Stetson replaced by a more formal hat for the day. The entire community turned out for the celebration, which continued well into the night at the town hall. There was music and dancing, feasting and toasting, the joy of the season amplified by the union of two people who had found each other against the odds. As Noah led Frances in a dance, he whispered in her ear, "Happy, Mrs. Reed." Frances smiled up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. Happier than I ever imagined possible. Later that night, as they rode through moonlit snow toward Circle R now, their shared home, Frances reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west seeking independence and found so much more: community, purpose, and a love that complemented rather than constrained her spirit. "What are you thinking?" Noah asked. Noticing her contemplative expression, Francis squeezed his hand. "That sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, even when it's not what you thought you wanted." Noah smiled, understanding in his eyes. "Like a stubborn Eastern lady who turns up on your land and changes everything. Or a protective cowboy who fixes your wagon wheel and steals your heart," Francis countered, laughing. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Francis's garden flourished, becoming famous throughout the territory for its variety and abundance. Noah's ranch prospered, expanding as Wyoming moved toward statehood. They welcomed 2 children, a son as adventurous as his father and a daughter who inherited her mother's determination and independence. Through it all, the ring remained on Francis's finger, a constant reminder of that winter day when a cowboy had slipped it on and declared them forever. And forever it had been not always easy, not always smooth, but always facing life together, as equals and partners in the grand adventure of building a life in the Wild West. On their 25th anniversary, Noah took Francis back to the ridge where they had first seen the elk, now part of their expanded property. The view was still breathtaking, though both of them had changed with the passing years. Noah's hair now streaked with silver, Francis's face lined by sun and laughter. "Any regrets?" Noah asked, his arm around her waist. Francis shook her head, looking out over the land they had nurtured together. "Not one. You." Noah's answer was to turn her gently toward him, his kiss as tender as it had been on that snowy day when he'd first proposed. "Only that I didn't find you sooner," he murmured against her lips. Francis smiled, touching the ring that had never left her finger. "We found each other exactly when we were meant to. And now we're forever," Noah finished for her, the words as true in that moment as they had been a quarter-century before. And as they rode back to the home they had built together, Frances Dawson Reed knew with absolute certainty that the frightened young woman who had shot a rattlesnake at dawn all those years ago could never have imagined the rich, full life that awaited her, a life made possible by courage, community, and the love of a good man who had recognized her strength, even when she doubted it herself. In the golden light of the setting sun, Circle R Ranch stood as a testament to what they had created together, not just a successful enterprise, but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. As enduring as the mountains that watched over the Wyoming territory they both called home.